finding out about my husband's affair.
I watched that 6-part story, so you don't have to. That's Sarah, and she's telling us how her husband left her when she was 30 weeks pregnant. So back in September 2024, her husband was having like a really depressed summer. He wasn't really feeling like himself. She ultimately asked him, "Is it me? Is your depression being caused by me?" And he basically told her, "Yes, I'm not in love with you anymore, but I do love you." After a week of going back and forth and trying to figure things out, after 5 years of sharing the same home together, he moved out and went to go live with his mother. Now she's, trying to grapple with the fact that she has a toddler, they have 2 large dogs, she's 30 weeks pregnant, and now she's basically a single mother. We're gonna call her husband Jack. So once he moves in with his mother, he starts doing weird things. Like, he's not really spending the night at his mother's house often. One night, actually, she tried to call him and his phone was dead. Come to find out, he was out drinking with his friends like all night long. And she's like, "This is like really weird behavior. I'm over here, struggling, and you're just like doing whatever you want." And so she basically told him, like, "You need to get an apartment so that you can take these 2 large dogs. I can't be responsible for everything that's going on right now." So he basically is like, "Okay, before I get this apartment, I'm going to go on a trip to Orlando." Now he's a videographer and he has a boss. So his boss's name is David, and then David's partner is Samantha. And then they went on a trip with this other couple. Jack is the videographer for this other couple's wedding. So Sarah didn't think much of it because she's like, "Oh, these are all married people." So Jack ends up sending a text message to Sarah, and the text message is from the mistress, and she's saying, "Hey, I actually have a spare room in my hotel in Orlando. Why don't you just stay with me?" And Sarah's thinking, like, that's so weird. Both Jack and the mistress are saying to each other, like, "We don't want a room with the other people that are going to be on this trip. We should room together." And they're both like, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. Like, let's do it, right? And so again, Jack was the videographer for the mistress's wedding just back in October 2023, right? So now it's September 2024. They're on their way to this Orlando trip. Come to find out, this married woman, the mistress, and Jack were basically in a full-blown relationship. They were holding hands. They were wearing matching shoes. Somebody sent Sarah a picture of them 2 underneath the table with the mistress. Her hand was on Jack's thighs, like very romantically, while they're simultaneously wearing matching shoes, right? So apparently the way that Jack and the married woman ended up connecting was after her wedding, he ended up following her on Instagram and they started casually DMing, which I guess is something that he's done with past brides that he's worked with, following them on Instagram. But he started commenting on her like workout outfits and all of that, and then sooner or later this all evolved into something more. Jack and the mistress blindsided everybody acting like a couple. David, Samantha, the mistress's best friend, they were all confused and completely like, what the hell is going on? They thought that both the mistress and Jack were in their own separate marriages, happily married. Nobody on that trip knew that these 2 were gonna come and start acting like a couple. Now, Sarah has no idea this is going on. While Jack is on this trip, he's not really messaging Sarah. He's not FaceTiming her to see the toddler. Sarah's trying to reach out. She's trying to talk to him, all of this. And he basically is growing distant, and he tells her, like, "We're not together anymore. This is over. I don't have to tell you my whereabouts anymore, Sarah." Which only added more to her heartbreak, because she's just like, damn, like, you completely, like, threw this whole separation out of left field, and now you don't even really want to communicate with me or check in on the kids. So she's really going through it at this point. So once he moved into his own spot, he started blaming Sarah for his depression coming back and it being even heavier. And she's telling him, like, "These are your choices. You decided to move out. You decided to end our marriage. Like, just come back. Just undecide everything you have and everything will be fine." And he's just like, no, this is all your fault. And she's just like, this is so bizarre. He will blow her up at 2:00 in the morning with guilt-tripping messages, acting like the victim while she is going through one of the hardest times in her life that he inflicted on her. But she still chose to be there for him. She still chose to support him and tell him everything is fine. You can always come back home. These are your decisions. So now Sarah's 34 weeks pregnant, and her husband tells her that he has to go on another work trip to New York and that he's going to take this woman with him that's married. And she's looking at him like, why? He tells her, oh, she's trying to get into videography. I'm going to get her into this festival. It's completely professional, completely platonic. So then Sarah asked him, like, oh, are you guys sharing a hotel room? And he proceeds to tell her yes. And she's like, this woman is married. Why are you sharing a hotel room in New York? Sarah's like, does her husband know about this? Because Sarah basically was like, well, I'm going to hit up the husband and see if he knows about all of this. And he's like, no, you don't have to do that. She's just being grateful that, I'm helping her get into this festival. And Sarah is like, this is just so odd. Like, it's not really adding up. At this point, Sarah's father-in-law is checking in on her. And he's like, how have you been? Like, how's it going? And she's like, well, it's not going too well. My husband's sharing another hotel room with another woman. And the father-in-law's like, what? Okay. He ends up picking up his son from the airport when he comes back from New York, and apparently he ripped him a new one. And then the husband, Jack, ends up hitting Sarah up and being like, what the hell did you do? Why would you tell my father about, what I'm doing up north, da-da-da-da? And she's just like, well, what else am I supposed to do? Like, he asked me how I'm doing. That's how I'm doing. Like, I don't know what else to tell you. Jack basically tells Sarah, go ahead and drop our kid off at your parents' house because it's about to get ugly. And she's sitting there like, I could just come over so we can talk. Like, it doesn't have to be that serious. So eventually she calms him down. He comes over to talk, and he basically comes over and breaks down and cries. He basically claims that he has no support, nobody understands him, nobody knows what he's going through, all of these things, right? And then eventually he confesses that he's actually been having an affair and he's been cheating on Sarah this entire time. Jack basically tells Sarah, me and this mistress are bonding over the fact that we're both going through divorces. And she's just like, so this is what all of this is about. At first, when Sarah hears that her husband cheated on her, she doesn't believe him. She's just like, what? Like, how could you have done that? And so she actually ends up contacting the other woman that was on the trip with them, which was Samantha and David, right? The bosses. She ends up hitting Samantha up, and she tells Samantha, like, my husband just told me that he did this and he did that. This all started back in Orlando. And the wife, Samantha, basically tells her, that's not the truth. You need to go and do some digging. Like, there's more to the story. Once Sarah spoke to Samantha, she went ahead and hit her husband up, and her husband is denying it. He's basically saying, like, no, this was not something that was planned. It all took off in Orlando. That was the first time we ever, were affectionate, were together. It all jumped off there. But Samantha's telling her, like, they were holding hands. They were telling each other they loved each other. They were super affectionate. There's no way everything started in Orlando, which was in September. And so Sarah's like, why are you lying to me? And you're like letting this woman ruin our lives. And Jack comes back and says, oh no, this woman's not ruining our lives. I ruined our lives well before she ever came along. So then Sarah decides to reach out to the mistress's husband, who we're going to call Daniel. She reaches out to Daniel, and she basically tells him, like, hey, this is what's been going on between my husband and your wife, da-da-da-da-da. Come to find out, Jack expressed that he wanted a divorce to Sarah September 1st. The mistress did the same thing to Daniel September 18th. So it's starting to look like they left their partners for each other, So they're cross-referencing notes. Sarah said that Daniel was a really sweet guy, just, kind of heartbroken, just as she was, And so now she's just like getting more information that confirms that this affair did actually happen, and B, it happened way before their trip to Orlando. So then Sarah decides to do a little bit of social media digging. She ends up seeing a picture that the mistress posted in her stories from when they went to New York, basically saying like, oh, we're partying in, Central Park. I can't believe we got to do this. Can't wait to do this again. Like something along those lines. And then 2 days later, which happened to be Jack's birthday, the mistress posts Jack again while he's still wearing his wedding ring, saying, happy birthday to the goat. So once Sarah saw these two posts, it kind of just like broke her heart even more, because she's like, wow, this is actually happening. How dare this woman, be so disrespectful? So then Sarah decides, I'm gonna go through our phone records. So when she goes through the phone records, she finds out that this affair has been happening since June. Now, Sarah's husband has like a little wave tatted on his hand, right? She's like, it's not the best tattoo, but he has it. So then she's like on the mistress's page, she's just looking around, and she all of a sudden sees that the mistress has the exact same wave tattoo on her hand. Same position, everything. And comes to find out, this mistress got that tattoo in August. Sarah and Jack are going back and forth, and Jack basically sends this very terrifying message saying, oh, maybe everybody will be better off if I wasn't around, right? And she tells him, like, don't say that. Like, that's not what I'm saying. He's basically telling her, like, I'm scared that you're going to ruin my affair, basically. And she's telling him, like, I'm not going to ruin your affair, dude. Like, do whatever, So it's like October 9th. It's the day before his birthday. Sarah admits, like, she was trying to do anything she could to save her marriage, to, keep her family together. And so she ends up sleeping with him. So then Sarah confronts him about what she found out in the phone records. And he basically loses it. And he hangs up on her, right? Basically tells her, like, oh, I'm gonna like come and get the rest of my things from the house. And so she's telling him, like, no, you don't need to come. Like, there's nothing left here. When he showed up to the house, he was so angry. She said that he was saying things that she can't even repeat on TikTok. So once her and the kids were safely in the car, she allowed him to go go into the house. And he ended up putting the key to the car, and then he eventually left the neighborhood. So once she called the police and they showed up, he ends up getting Baker Act, which I guess is like a 5150 kind of situation where they involuntarily admit somebody into, you know, the mental institute because they feel like they're a harm to themselves or others. And so that ends up happening to him. Once she put the toddler to sleep and she's, you know, kind of winding out that same night, she ends up getting a call from the mistress herself. The mistress is trying to call Sarah and tell her where the husband is. And Sarah's sitting there like, I know where he is. I know why he's there. It all happened at my house. I'm the one that called the cops, you know? And the mistress is basically saying like, oh, he doesn't need to be in there. Like, that place is horrible. We need to get him out. And Sarah's like, no, he's finally going to get the help that he needs. And she's like, no, what he said that he was going to do, he's not going to do that. He's not going to unalive himself. Like, we need to get him out. And Sarah's like, you don't know him. I've been with him for 9 years. He needs help. And so she basically said that she was nice, but she did tell that woman off for the next hour and a half, and basically told her everything about Jack and like things that she probably didn't know, just the background, the lore of who Jack was. Before they get off the phone, Sarah reveals to the mistress that Sarah and Jack are very much still sleeping together, as they can because they're a married couple. And this obviously comes as a shock to the mistress. She had no idea Jack was still sleeping with his wife. The mistress is like, when did you guys last sleep together? She's trying to get all the details. Sarah didn't really blame the mistress. She is fully aware of how Jack can be manipulative and lie and all of those things. So she just felt like maybe, you know, the mistress fell for all of that. Later on, she finds out the mistress is just as horrible as she probably should have thought she was. So the mistress ends up being in communication with Jack the entire time while he's in the mental institution, which really pissed off Sarah because she was just like, dude, he really needs the help in there. Like, leave him alone. Sarah ends up not even speaking to Jack pretty much the entire time he's in there. He doesn't call her until he finds out that he can get out and tells Sarah, like, I need the address, I need your information to be able to be released. After he goes through an evaluation, less than 24 hours later, he's released from the mental institution. So Sarah goes to pick up Jack from the mental hospital, but she also takes her father-in-law with her, right? So they pull up, they end up having like a 2-hour conversation with Jack in the car afterwards and being like, what are you doing? Like, you're ruining your life, you're ruining your family's life, like you're putting this woman, this random woman, above your family and your children. Like, how does this make sense to you? You know, they think they're making headway. They think that was a really good conversation. Come to find out, the mistress actually called the mental institute and was trying to pose as Jack's lawyer and get him out early. She's not even a lawyer in that state. Who would have thought that the mistress would be upset that Jack went home with his wife that night? But she was. The next day, Jack leaves. He ends up sending a message to Sarah and being like, why didn't you tell my mistress that I got out the hospital? She kept you updated the entire time that I was in the hospital. She was owed the update. Sarah's like, are you absolutely kidding me? She rips him a new one in the messages. And she's like, how are you asking me to update your mistress? Does that make any sense to you? Jack is just asking, like, let me see my kid. Let me talk to my son. Let me talk to my son. Sarah's like, no, we're going to talk about how you just came at me because I didn't update your mistress on your whereabouts. Like, no. We're not just going to speed past this, right? And then Jack all of a sudden is like, you know what? I don't want to stay at the house with you anymore. Sarah's like, that's fine, because you know that when we're in person, we're absolutely fine. There's no drama, and your mistress hates that. She hates that. And Jack's like, no, I'm just changing things and how they go from now on. This is how they're going to be from now on, Sarah. Jack basically tells her, if you have a problem with that, just call your lawyer, write something up, and send it over to me, but I'm done arguing with you. So now Sarah's 36 weeks pregnant, right? She needed Jack to watch the toddler while she went to a doctor's appointment. And Jack basically tells her that he can't watch the toddler because his mistress is flying into the airport and he needs to go pick her up. The mistress doesn't even live in state. He's like, oh, I need to go pick her up. And Sarah's like, why are you putting this woman over your kids? Like, I need you to help me. While Sarah's at the doctor's appointment, she ends up finding out she's already 3 centimeters dilated, and this baby is probably gonna come any day now. It's Wednesday, and the doctor is telling her by the weekend the baby's gonna be here. And she's thinking, great, the mistress is in town, just add to my stress. The mistress ends up leaving. She's on some trip she had to go to. The husband ends up coming over to Sarah's house. Sarah's arguing with Jack, of course. She's telling him, like, you're neglectful, this infidelity is so wrong. Like, she's going in on him. One thing leads to another, and they end up sleeping together. When they end up sleeping together, it, I guess, triggers her further into labor, and that's when the baby comes. She takes her toddler over to her parents' house. She had already told her husband a week prior, you're not welcomed in my baby's delivery room. You're horrible. Like, I'm not gonna let you in my baby's room. And so she went and picked up her mother, went over to the hospital, and he's texting her this whole time like, yeah, it's a great idea to have your mom because she's not gonna be anxious or, you know, pushy or nagging the nurses or anything. Like, have fun with that experience. I should be in there. It ends up being a really slow process to actually get her to give birth, basically decides like, you know what, I'm just gonna let him come to the delivery, like whatever. So she tries to call him, no answer. Over the next hour, she ends up calling him a total of 3 times. He never picks up. When he finally calls her back, she's like, hey, the baby's gonna be here soon. I'm gonna let you know when you can come see him. And he's like, okay, cool. Sarah has her baby, beautiful baby boy. She actually gives the baby boy her last name instead of her husband's last name. And she had already told him that she was gonna do this. He comes and sees the baby. Come to find out, the mistress actually drove back into town when Sarah went into labor, and she was with the husband the entire time that Sarah was in labor, which, you know, obviously Sarah found annoying, but she was like, I'm not gonna let anything ruin the fact that I just had a beautiful baby boy. The whole time that Jack is sitting at the hospital with Sarah, he's texting the mistress back and forth. And apparently the mistress told him that she like wants to have his babies and was sending him pictures of this DJ that brings out his kids on stage. And she's like, I can't wait for that to be us one day. And then she's like upset that he has to spend the night with Sarah at the hospital, but she doesn't have kids of her own, so she, I guess, doesn't understand like why he would have to spend the night. So when they finally take the baby boy home, Jack is crying like, I don't want to leave, I don't want to go. And Sarah's looking at him like, you are deciding to do this, stop making these decisions. After that argument, this is when Sarah decided to get on TikTok and start sharing her story as a form of grief and just a form of just like expressing herself. Jack sees the TikToks, he starts going after Sarah and being like, take them down, no, you can't do that, like you can't be sharing our information like that. Apparently, Jack's co-workers end up seeing TikToks from Sarah as well. Jack ends up quitting his job because of the TikTok exposure, and basically decides the first week that the baby was born, he's not gonna come and see the baby at all. He's gonna punish them. So then Sarah takes it a step further. She ends up reaching out to the mistress's own mother just to be like, hey, do you know what your daughter's up to? She wasn't trying to be mean. She just wanted to genuinely know. Do you know that your daughter's out here home wrecking? And so she ends up having a conversation with the mother. Come to find out, the mother ends up ripping the mistress a new one and being like, what are you doing out here? Da, 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 da. So on this exact day, Jack ends up actually being at Sarah's house, right? So when the mistress ends up calling Sarah, Sarah puts her on speaker and the mistress is going off. She's like, stay away from my family. You're a psycho. Da, 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 da. Basically even threatening Jack, like, I don't want to be with you anymore. Jack literally loses his shit, leaves the house. He goes and tries to fix the relationship with the mistress. Once the husband leaves, the mistress ends up calling Sarah again. And when she calls Sarah again, Sarah informs her once again, oh, just so you know, me and my husband were sleeping together again. That's what triggered me to go into labor. The mistress ends up calling Jack and being like, hey, did you sleep with your wife again? Like, give me all the details, da 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 da. Jack freaks out. He, instead of being with his postpartum wife and his newborn baby, he ends up booking a flight, flying out to go see his mistress. The mistress ends up taking him to an NFL game. They end up reconciling. Jack ends up posting the mistress on his story. They're still arguing about TikToks, telling her like she's a liar, she needs to take them down. And that's when, you know, she posted that whole thing being like, my husband posted his mistress 1 week after I'm postpartum. The mistress got so pissed off about this, she ends up calling Sarah's mother and being like, your daughter needs to take this down, da 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 da. Sarah did take down the post and she put it right back up. When Sarah first took down the post though, she made another post saying how the husband and the mistress was essentially harassing her, right? And come to find out, the cops show up at Sarah's door. Apparently, Jack and the mistress went to the police and told them that Sarah was harassing them, that she was making fake TikToks and putting their phone number and their personal information, which is doxing, on the internet. And so when the police came, they didn't even really want to see Sarah's, you know, TikTok. And upon looking, they're like, oh, this is like a dispute between you and your husband. You guys have to figure this out. Jack's trying to tell Sarah that these TikToks are going to be damaging to their boys and that she really needs to think about the family. She's not thinking about the family. And she's just telling him like, I'm not taking my TikToks down. And you guys are the ones that are making fake burner pages and harassing me. Every time I block you and your mistress, another page ends up popping up anyway. January 2nd, 2024, the husband ends up filing for divorce. Sarah was waiting for him to file for divorce. On their 5-year anniversary, she counter files for divorce. So they're moving through that process now. Over the weekend, Jack ends up taking the boys. Sarah tells him like, hey, our baby has his second doctor's appointment. I want to be able to take him. It's going to be at 7:30. And he's like, no, I'll take him. And she's like, no, I want to be there or we can go together. Jack is adamant, like, you can't be there. I'm taking him, right? While Jack is with the kids over the weekend, Sarah is texting him like, hey, can I get an update on the boys? Like, how are they doing? Da 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 da. All Jack keeps saying is take down those TikToks, take down those TikToks. Sarah's mother basically tells her like, just show up to the doctor's appointment. Those are your babies too. Just show up. So she shows up at the doctor's appointment. Jack causes a scene. He loses it. He's like, no, 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 I can't believe you're here. Either you go in with him or I go with him, da 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 da. So then finally Sarah's like, okay, fine, you take him in. She's like, where's our toddler? He's like, the toddler is next door with my mother at the donut shop. So she's like, fine, I'll go over there. So she goes over there. The next day, she's at home. Sarah gets a knock on the door. Come to find out, it's the police at her door again, this time serving her with a restraining order. But the cops like, don't even trip. The restraining order was denied. However, you do have a court date set now where he can argue to try to get the restraining order actually granted. They show up on their court date. The judge asks for their names, asks a few questions, immediately dismisses the case because he's like, this is not divorce court, this is domestic violence court. And the husband was so upset, he slams his little binder on the table and then walks out of the courthouse. This is when Sarah kind of realized, like, yo, this man hates me. Like, he actually hates me. To this day, he's still telling her, like, take the TikToks down. She refuses. She says that, thank God I like dodged a bullet and I moved on with my life. And the father-in-law, the grandpa, is very much in the picture. He's there for the babies. They hang out at her parents' house with the babies all the time. He's such a good grandpa and I love that for her. I'm glad that she has a good support system. She said that to her knowledge, she doesn't think that the boys, when they go over to Jack's house, that they're not with the mistress, but she has no idea. But then I was watching videos later on after the series ended, and I saw that she heard her baby boy, the toddler, say, oh, I met daddy's girlfriend. And then he went over to his grandparents' house and he said the same thing, like, oh, I met daddy's girlfriend. Her and Jack had came up with an agreement. If the kids are to meet their, significant others, first, Jack and Sarah are gonna meet each other's significant others initially, right? And then once they give the green light, then they can go on and meet the kids. She said she would never take him back, but if he came back and begged for her back, she would obviously enjoy it, and then she would say no. So shout out to her. A few comments were asking her, like, how are your kids? How are they dealing with all of this? She said, obviously they're very young. Neither of them really are conceptualizing what's going on. When all of this first happened, the toddler obviously woke up every morning asking, where is daddy? I want to see daddy. But eventually he started to understand what was going on, and he now says, like, daddy broke mommy's heart. And so I just wish them the absolute best. Like, I know, like, things like this are so traumatizing because you had no idea something like this was going to happen. But I'm glad that she found out the truth. You guys go and show her love. You tagged me in this a bunch. I wanted to make sure I got it out to you guys. I appreciate you guys as always. Have a beautiful day. Bye.